Hey guys, in today's video, I want to go over React Query. So React Query is this package which I think can be best summed up by this line here. So hooks for fetching, caching, and updating asynchronous data in React. So what exactly does this mean? Generally, in a React project, we're going to be making things like API calls. And you might want to store that data in Redux, so that way it's cached and then you can fetch it again without having to actually wait for it to load. But one of the things about that is that it takes a lot of manual configuration. So we as a developer have to set up a lot of it. And with React Query, some of that setup is actually extracted, and React Query instead takes care of it. So I want to show you guys some of the features of this. And I think the best way to do this is through an example. But we also need a CRUD API so I can really show you guys how powerful this is. So what I've done is I've created a very simple API. There'll be a link to it in the description. It's a Go API and it doesn't require a database, just stores all the data in memory. And I'll also throw in a little bit of documentation about it. Well, the basics of it is that it has a CRUD for posts, and a post has the ID, a name, and a body. And we're going to be using that with React Query, so I can show you guys some of the really nice features of React Query. Okay, so just before I go any further into actually coding, I just want to say that this is a really popular package, so I do recommend learning it. You can see here it's used by like Google, Walmart, PayPal, Amazon, Microsoft, so really big tech companies. There's also some examples here, and the main thing I want to point out on this page is that this is a GitHub page for it. I'll leave a link to this in the description. There's a lot of documentation, and whatever issue you're having with this, because you'll probably run into issues, you can look at the documentation. It's really nice, really informative, lots of examples, and I think it will definitely help you if you run into any problems. Okay guys, so to get started, you want to open up your IDE and then open up the terminal. So I'm just using the integrated terminal here. So what we want to do is type npx create react app, and then just specify whatever directory you want. So I've already run this. This will just create the basic create react app template. Now we also want some dependencies. So you can see here I've already added some dependencies. So what you want to do is type in npm i. So we want react router DOM. I've already got a video on this. I'm not going to be going into anything too complex for this, but if you guys are interested in React Router DOM, I'll put a link to a video for that. We also want Axios to make our API requests and React Query. So those two things will take you guys for a couple of minutes. So just let that finish and then come back to the video. All right, so let's just do npm run start to start up our development server. I've also started up the API. The API by default will run on port, I think localhost 5050. So yep. And the React server will run on port 3000. That's just the default for the create react app. Okay, so let's go into our file here. Let's go into source, and then let's first just set up the React router just to get that out of the way. So let's import browser router from React router, and let's just say browser router, and just nest our app inside of that. Okay, we can close that one now, and then let's go to the app.js. So I'm going to remove all of this, remove the logo, and then let's create a couple routes. So in this video, I'm only going to show you guys two things. So if I go back to the documentation, okay, so you can see in the documentation there's a couple of main sections. So there's queries and then there's mutations. So queries are generally when you get data. So in API terms, that'll be a GET request. And mutations are things like creates, updates, and deletes. So I'm going to be going over both of these. For the queries, I'm going to, that one's quite simple. For mutations, I'm only going to go over updates. And the reason for that is it applies to the logic that we're going to apply to updates is going to apply to both deletes and creates as well. That'll be really clear once we actually get into that part of the video. Okay, so let's just create two basic routes. So let's put a switch here, and let's also import this. So import switch. We also want a route, and let's just get redirect from React Router DOM. Let's say route. So the path for this one is just going to be the base path. The component I'll leave as empty, and then just put exact here. So yeah, the component I'll leave as empty for now. We'll fix that in a moment. I know it's going to throw an error. Let's do another path as well, another route as well. And this was just going to be /, actually let's do /post/id. And this is going to be like a variable. So we're going to be able to get this dynamically, and it can be whatever you want. Once again, I do have a video about React Router DOM. And the component for this, also just going to leave as empty for now. And it's just put a redirect to slash in case none of these first two match, or just redirect to the base path. Okay, so let's just create a component for this, the base route, where this component, all I want it to do is just render the posts. Now, I just remember that we should probably actually add in some posts. So I'm using Postman here, so you guys can use something like Insomnia as well, but I prefer Postman. So this just lets us make API requests. So this is the endpoint, if you guys remember. So localhost port 5050 and slash posts with a get request will return to you the all of the posts. So right now we have none, so it's just an empty array. Let's change this to a post request. And here, if we go to body, select raw and just make sure it's on JSON, then all this expects is a body of, let's say, actually, yeah, so it requires a name and a body. So let's say name, though it doesn't matter, but I just want to put name first. So React query tutorial. And then body, I'm just going to put somebody here. And then if we click send on that, you can see it returns the name and the body, and it also returns an ID. Okay, so that's this is all and both of these two fields are required, by the way. So now if we go back to get and then send this, you can see now our array contains one object, which is just what we created. So now I'm just going to add in one more. So let's say 2 and 2. If we create this one, we get a different one, and then I'm going to go to get, and now we have 2. So once again, this is just stored in memory. It's not actually stored in the database, so you guys don't have to worry about that. But now let's work with these two, and let's update them, and let's fetch them, and let's see how that works with the React query. So going back to our editor, let's create a component where it's just going to render these, and it's going to show things like if it's an error, it's going to show if it's loading, if it's updating. So let's do that. Let's create a new folder called containers. And inside containers, I'm going to create a file called postlist.js. Let's import React from React. Let's say post list. This is going to be a functional component. For now, I'm just going to have it render that. And just remember to export this as default. Okay, and then let's grab post list. Remember to import this here. And just for now, I'm going to set this the other route to this as well to avoid throwing an error. So if we go to our React app, you can see we get post list. And if we go to /post/ anything, it also works. And if we go to an invalid URL, oh, I think that is because I have to set this to exact. So if we go to an invalid URL, you can see it takes us back. Okay, so that's nice. Now let's actually use React Query. So let's import useQuery from React Query. And let's create a new constant. I'm just going to call this info. We're going to destructure this. Let's say info is equal to useQuery. Now useQuery, I think if we go to the documentation for this, so it accepts a unique key and then the asynchronous function. This just has to be a function that is .thenable. So just a promise-based function. Now, this key here is what it's going to use this key, and specifically this key has to be unique because it's going to use this key to cache the data. So whatever data we return here, it's going to cache it against this key. So if we were to, let's say, reuse this, so in this example they have to-dos. If let's say we were to reuse this to-dos key while fetching posts data, it's going to overwrite all of the to-dos data with the posts. Okay, so now back in our editor, let's give this a key of posts. Now this key doesn't actually have to just be a string, by the way. And I think by default, if you pass it a string like this, it actually gets converted into an array with a single element of whatever string you put in. The reason for this is because the query key has to be anything that can be serialized. So this can't be like a function unless the function, for example, returns something. Actually, no, I don't think it can be a function at all, sorry. But yeah. Now the second parameter is a asynchronous function. So let's create a new file here. Let's call this queries.js. And then all I want to do in this one is just export a constant called get post list. And this is going to be an async function. And all I want to do, let's also import Axios because I'm going to make it an API request. Now I want to do const response is equal to await axios.get and then the URL. So I'm just going to copy this from here. And remember to put the HTTP. And just one side note about this, I'm not sure exactly why this is, but you do have to put a slash at the end of the API, the URL, sorry. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but yeah, just remember that in case you guys run into some errors with the API. And then we're going to return res.data. And actually what we can do instead is just destructure data and just return it directly. So you can see here, we're not doing any try catch. So if Axios throws an error, we're not actually catching it. So this might be a bit confusing. But we don't have to worry about that because React Query will actually take care of that for us. So you can see this is a really, really simple 4-line function. So let's pass that into here. So let's say get post list. And I think there is a third parameter, which is just configuration. But I'm going to leave that for now and we'll get into that in a moment. For now, I just want to console log this info object. So let's go to our browser, open up the terminal, and then check here. So let me just refresh this. Okay, so you can see we have a couple of console logs. So let's check the first one. There's a lot of stuff here. You don't need to know all of this. So I'll highlight the key ones for you now. So an important one is data here. So currently it's undefined, and this is when the component first mounted. So we don't actually have our data yet from the API. The next one is error. This one's also very important because whatever error message is thrown in your function actually gets returned here. The next one that is quite important is this is error and is fetching. These are just booleans to let you know if there is an error and if you should actually check it. Is loading as well. Is loading and is fetching is slightly different. I'll explain the difference between these two in a little bit. What else? So there's is success. There's also status. So you can see here currently the status is loading, so it's trying to get the data now. And I think there's also a refetch. Yeah. So this is just a function where when you call this function, it'll just grab the data again. Okay, so that's quite a lot. And I don't want you guys to get overwhelmed by this. It's actually really simple. Especially when you realize we're not going to be using all of this. Okay, so now let's go down a few to where we probably have the data. So yeah, so this one here, we can see the status success. You can see data here is actually an array of 2 objects. So if we open this up and open up both of them, you can see these are the 2 posts that we created. So React Query Tutorial 2 and a React Query Tutorial. So that's nice. We can see the error is null. Is error is false, is fetching is false, is idle is false, is loading is false, and is success is true. So that's quite nice. And let's now make it throw an error. So you'll see something quite cool happen here. So if we just put a couple of slashes at the end, so this will return a 404. So if we come back here, let me actually refresh this. You can see it makes the API request and it fails. And then it waits a little bit and makes another one, and that one fails. It waits even longer, makes another one, and I think that is actually the last one that it makes. And if we check this, you can see, so it made 1, 2, 3, 4. So it made 4 requests. This is because it retries to get the, so if an error is thrown, it will actually retry it. So that's quite nice, and that can be configured. The number of retries can be configured. If you guys remember, there was a delay between the retries that can also be configured. And yeah, there's a bunch of things that can be configured. The key one I'll show you guys now is I'm going to click on the console, and then I'm going to click on the actual web page, and you can see it fetches the data again. So this is because it refetches on window focus. So for example, if we go to switch tabs, it will also refetch the data. I think it's not doing it here because it's waiting for the last one. Okay, so now let's take a look at these, the info that we have now when it's error. So if I look at data, data's undefined. And if we go to error, which is error, oh, this one's still loading, so that's why we have error as null. Oh, and actually it keeps loading until it reaches the final retry, so we have to actually go down here to find it. So yeah, so now data's undefined, error. So this is actually an Axios error, so this is the error that Axios throws. If we go to request, actually if we go to response, data 404 page not found. So yeah, error contains the error that is thrown from the function. So if you ever want to know what error was thrown, this is where you would find it. We can also see here that is error is true and is success is false. And also status is error. So now that we know some of the information we have, we can use this and create some logic. So let's do that now. First, let me just fix this endpoint to be successful again. And I'm going to destructure some things here. So let's grab is loading, is fetching. Let's also grab data, and I think that, oh, actually is error as well. Okay, so I think that should be fine. Now let's do this. Let's say if is loading, and the ones with the is at the start are booleans. So if is loading, then I just want to return paragraph tag saying loading. If is error, then I just want to return paragraph tag saying error getting posts. The reason I'm not showing the actual error from this error object is because I know this isn't going to throw an error, so it wouldn't actually ever run. And so if it's loading, then it'll show this. If it's not loading and there is an error, it will show this. And if it's not loading and there's no error, that means it was successful. So we don't have to actually we don't have to do another if to check if it's successful, because there's no other option. We can just do return have data, and then just remove that last one. So let's take a look at this now. Let's actually throttle the internet. So if we go to fast 3G and I refresh this, you can see it said loading for a second. Let me actually set it to slow 3G. So it will say loading, and then you can see here it's loading, and once we have it, it says have data. So straight away, a lot of the hard work that we normally have to do with something like Redux is taken care of for us. And a quick side note about that, this can be used with Redux or without it. It's not a case of either React Query or Redux, because you can use them together and they do work well together. So we have this logic here and we have this. Now I just want to go over the is fetching. So I think the easiest way to show this is have data. And then here I'm just going to say is fetching. And if it is, then I'm just going to say updating. Now this will show you guys the difference between these two. So we have the internet on slow 3G. You can see initially it's loading, then we have data, so it doesn't show the update. Now let me go to another tab and then come back here, and you can see it says updating. So the is loading is false because it's not showing loading, and the have data is true, and the is fetching is true. So what does this mean? So the data that we collected in our first call when the component first mounted is actually cached against this key. So we do have the data, but we don't have the most up-to-date data for this moment, because in our case, it is the most up-to-date, but in reality, things change, and so it's data. So when we come back to this, the data might be different, but there's no point of showing a loader when we have the previous data. Instead, we can just let the user know that it's updating, and that's what this is fetching is for. It's when we have cached data, and we're refetching it just to make sure that our cached data is up to date. And if it does find new data, it will update data for you. So if I think an example for that would be, let me actually render the data that we get, and then I'll show you guys an example of this. So let's do data.map. I'm just going to return a div. Inside of here, I'm going to say ID is l.id. Let's grab the name and the body. So name, body. I'm just going to set this to fast now. So you can see we have the first one here and we have the second one here. So now I'm going to come here into Postman and I'm going to update, I'm going to create another post. So let's call this 3. And let's send that. Okay, so now if we click on this, you can see it was really fast, but you can see that it did actually grab the new one. So that, and it didn't show a loader. I know it did flicker, but that was just because there is updatings at the top and it was really fast. I think if I slow this down and then let me do a delete this time. So the way the delete works is you just grab the ID, put it at the end of the URL and set this to delete. So I'm going to delete that. Then I'm going to click here. You can see it's updating. And then the one that we deleted has also been deleted. So you can see that data, this data object is also updated when we refetch. Okay, now I want to show you guys how to deal with errors. And specifically, we're going to be looking at some of the configurations that we can do with this. So let's just add in these slashes back here. Let's also just, let's check this. So I'm going to set it to online. So you can see it's loading. It did one success one before I cleared it. And it keeps retrying it with a certain delay in between each retry. So if we just keep waiting, you can see it doesn't throw the error until it fails the final retry. Now, if I click here and I click back, it's going to say loading again because we don't have the cache data and it doesn't. And we first check if it's loading. So let's do some configurations now. So let's say, and actually let's check the documentation. So I think if you scroll quite far down, there's things like a retry. So if it should retry or not, and the number of retries as well. So if false, failed, queries will not retry by default. If true, it will retry indefinitely. And if we set it to an integer, it will state we can set the number of times we want to retry. So let's just do retry and set it to 1. And let's just do that and see how that works. So you can see here, it does it the first time, retries it, and then that's it. Let's change the retry delay to, let's say, 500 milliseconds. So you can see it tried it, wait 500 milliseconds, so half a second, and then retried it again and failed. So there is a bunch more configurations you could do, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. Okay, so now let's create another page. But just before I do that, I want to put a button here and just have that say view, and on click, I just want to redirect them. So I'm going to do props. I'm just going to do props.history.push. And I'm just going to push them to /posts/l.id. So now if I just come here, and if I also fix the URL, so if I click view, it should, it redirects us, but the reason that nothing changes is because we actually here use the same component for this. So let's create a new component. So inside containers, we want to create a new component. I'm just going to call this one post. Let's import React from React. Let's say post is equal to a React functional component. And just export this as default. Okay, so let's set that there. Let's grab the ID from the URL. So ID, maybe the props.match.params. So yeah, we have the ID now. Okay, so in the API, let's just get everything again. So let's do this. Let's grab the first one here. And let's put it to the end. And instead of deleting it, let's just do another GET request. So this will return just the single post. Now, I know it's a bit redundant here because we have all this data in the other one, but normally in REST APIs, we might not have all of the data in your GET, and maybe in the GET an individual one, you'll have all the data. So I was just trying to simulate a more realistic API. So now what I want to do is just get that data from this endpoint. So let's do data. Actually, we can just copy and paste from here. Pretty much everything. Yeah, so let me just copy and paste everything. I'm going to keep ID at the top. And that seems fine. I'm just going to change this because data is actually not going to be an object like that. So I'm just going to keep the JSX and then just set this to data and remove the button. And yeah, so now the key is going to be different. So I want the key to look like something like this, where it's the second element is going to be an object and it's going to state the ID that we're looking for. So instead of 1, I'm just going to set it to ID, which is the ID in the URL. And instead of get post list, I'm going to create a new function called get post. And I think get post, we get the key and then the object. So if I go back, so this is the object and this is the key. And I'm going to do the exact same thing as this, except I'm going to change this to template literals. And I'm going to do object.id. So this ID here is object.id. And key we're not actually going to use, so we can leave that out. Okay, so that seems fine. Let's also now, let's now add this in. So inside post, I'm going to change this to get post. So not get post list now, just get post. And we're going to remove the old import. So if I save this, you can see that now we have all the data. If I go back here and I go to the second one, you can see we have all the data. And if I actually set this to slow and I refresh, you can see that we have loading and then we have the data. So that's working as well. Okay, so now what I want to do is actually set up some state to hold on to this data. And the reason for that is because I actually want to add some inputs here. So I'm just going to say state and set state is equal to useState, where I initially want this to be an object which has name and body and just set those both to empty strings. Let's create a onChange handler, which is just going to accept the event. It's going to do a event.persist. And then I just want to set the state to, actually this should be, yeah, so I need the previous one. And I'm just going to return an object where I'm going to spread in the previous. I'm going to do event.target.name, event.target.value. And then let's create some inputs here. So input, it's going to have a name of name and an onChange of onChange handler. And then we just space these out. So put input here as well. Give this a name of body and an onChange to the onChange handler. So let's just test this out, make sure it's working. So console log state. Oops. So just state. So if I do test, you can see the name's updating, and if I do body, you can see the body's updating. Okay, so that's nice. Now what we actually want to do is set these values. So the value of this is going to be equal to state.name. And the value of this is going to be equal to state.body. Now the reason we do this, so you can see it doesn't make a difference here, but the reason we do this because what we're going to do is, I'm actually just going to add one thing here. So I think let's check the documentation. It's I don't want to refetch the data. So this one right here, so refetch on window focus, I'm just going to set that to false. And on success, it's capital S. So on success, what I want to do, we get data here. I want to do set state. Name is data.name and body is data.body. So if we open up this, you can see we have the name and body, and we can edit this. And then if I refocus it, it doesn't change. And I think if we didn't do this, I think it actually might overwrite it. So if we change this, yeah, you can see that when we come back to it, it fetches the data again, and the data is just this. We haven't actually updated it. So it keeps removing it, and I don't think that's good user experience. So that's why I set this to false here. Okay, so we have that and we have state. So now the reason I did this is because I'm going to add in a button where when we click this button, we're going to update this post. So let's say button update. And on click, I'm going to call this update function. So let's create that. So normally you might just make your API request here straight away, but we're going to be using the useMutation hook. So let's do that. I'm just going to put this above here and then say do the useMutation here. So we get mutate and then we get info. So info is going to be very similar to this. So I'm going to destructure it, but I'm just going to leave it like that for now. I'm going to say useMutation. Now this just accepts a function, and it's going to run this function when we call mutate. So I'll show you guys what I mean. Let's go to queries and create a new one. So export const update query, update post, sorry. It's going to be async. Data that we get here, I just call this data for now. I'll explain to you guys where we get that from in a moment. So let's actually copy and paste this. And let's change it to a put. Now, data is actually, so a put request actually requires a request body. So that's the second one here. So as you can see, data. So I'm going to say that this is going to be data.body. So it's going to come from here. And I also want to do data.id to know which post we're updating. Let me show you guys an example in Postman. So this is let's just grab all of them. So yeah, let's grab the first one. And let's change it to a put. So in the name, I'm going to set this to updated and updated. And this returns the updated data. Let's now do a get request to just the base URL. And you can see we have updated. So that's how the put endpoint works. So it does require the ID in the URL. And the body should have name and body. So how do we actually call this? Well, let's first say update post here. So make sure to import that. And in this, in the function that we created here, this update, I'm going to try to call mutate. So mutate is this. And I'm just going to do, and this actually should be async because we have to await mutate. And then here, what we can do is pass an object. And this object is actually going to be this data here. And I just realized probably should name this same stuff. So let's call this body. So I'm going to do ID is ID. So this comes from the URL. So up here. And let's say body is state. Now let's do the catch. I'm actually just going to leave this empty. We won't throw an error unless these are empty. So let's test this out. And actually before I test it out, I just want to console log info. So this info is the info we get from the useMutation. So let's just add a 1 at the end of these. And let's click update. So you can see it's loading success. And if I check the network tab, if I go to XHR, so this is the put request as the body. So we have the 1s at the end and the preview, which is updated. So if I refresh this, you can see the 1s are there. So you might have noticed that when we update this, so if I set this to 2, that this is successful, but these haven't been updated. So you might think, well, we could just refetch the data. So let's say, so update here, which mutates it. And so here we can actually add in more options. And I think there's an unsuccess, which gives us the data. And then we could, let's say, get refetch from here and then just call refetch. Now this would work, and I'll actually show you guys it working. So if I do 3 and 3, you can see it does update it. However, it also does show the loading. That's not a massive issue because this is quite fast, but it is still an API call that is, I think, unnecessary. Another solution that you guys probably thought of is just to set state, set the names here to the data state. That is also an option. However, when we, let's say, change this, it would also change that. So I'll show you guys what I mean. So if we do state dot, so if I change this here, it changes it there as well. So yeah, you could do that if you think that is valid. The way that I would go about doing it is to actually update the cache. So the way that we would update the cache for this is you would have to import query cache. And let me just remove this. So what we do is we'd use query cache and we'd set query data. So I think the first parameter to this is the key. And this is the key here. So let's just copy this. And the second one is the data that we actually set this to. So I think, yeah, so this is data or updata. So if you set this to a function, whatever you return from this will be the new query cache for this key. And previous is the previous cache data. And if you choose to set this as just like an object, then it would just completely overwrite it to this object. And this is a complete overwrite, by the way. It doesn't just append or do something like that. You'd have to do that manually. So here's what I want to do. I want to update this without making an API call and update the cache. So I'm just going to say prev. I'm going to return, this is an object. I'm going to spread in the previous one. And I'm going to say name is data.name. So data here is the success object. And if you guys remember, the success does return. So in the API call here, let's do a quick put to this one. Oh, I forgot the slash. It does return the updated fields. So we can set name to that and body to data.body. So if we save this and we come here, so let's say 4. Oh, and I just realized. Let's change this back to data. I guess now if we change it to 4 and change this one to 4, hit update, it updates these to 4. So whatever this one was, and we don't get a loading because we updated the cache directly. And then what we could do is, let's say, a background update as well. So this way, what we can do is also here, we can still call the refetch. So we can still call this, but while the new data is loading, we can update the query cache as well. Just one more thing I want to do is I didn't properly go through what info was. So info just contains some. So here it contains nothing, so data's nothing because we haven't actually clicked it. So let's click this. So it shows the loading, and then when it's successful, so let's open this. The the data that came back from the API request. And is error, is idle, is loading, is success. What we can do is we can take this is loading and we can just, for example, set the button to disabled. So disabled is equal to info.isLoading. So now if I change this like 5, I click this, it's really fast, so let's slow it down. You can see it's disabled, we can't click it anymore. And then once it's done, it will do it. And this is actually a really good way to show you guys that. So if I update this, you can see it has 7 and it's updating in the background. So this way we don't have to wait for the update to happen and then update this name. We can just directly update the cache and then it will do it itself. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know this is something a little bit new. I hope it's useful. I hope it shows you guys that this is actually quite good. It's quite new as well. There is a link in the description of this video to a video on YouTube by the guy who actually created this, and it's really cool and it really shows some of the stuff that I've shown you guys here. I've shown it in a little bit more detail here than the video that I'm going to link, but it's still a great video. It was done by the actual creator of this package. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.